So when you're a PLG company, the thing that's existential is, are you giving value to your users? Which is great. The thing that I love about PLG is you are perfectly aligned with your users. Like, your incentive is to serve them. And if you give them value, then you grow and they retain. And if you don't, it's so fair. I love that in a PLG startup.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Darin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Good morning, everyone. Today, we're diving into the innovative mind and CEO behind Jam.Dev, a tool that deals with the never-ending frustration on how to report and communicate bugs. With a background as a product manager at Cloudflare, the founder and CEO experienced the challenges of debugging firsthand, sparking the creation of her company. Under her leadership, they have won over major clients like Unilever, Staples, T-Mobile, and Dell, completely self-served. And we're going to talk about it. Join us as we discuss the journey towards achieving product market fit and the critical role of user retention in a startup success. Welcome to the Product Tea, Dani Grant. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you so much for having me. This morning, I feel super energized because a huge project that the engineering team has been working on for months is about to go out the door. And right before I joined this call, I joined the last, everyone together planning the day. How are we going to get this out? There's a buzz in the company today, and I definitely feel it.
Oh, that's really cool. So how would you rate your day from a 1 hotfix to 10 complete server meltdown then?
So here's the thing about the Jam engineering team. They always talk about how to move fast in the long term, which means that in the short term, we do things that feel kind of slower, but they prevent having to do 10 hot fixes or completely rewrite something or there being tons of fires. And actually, one of the really cool things that's been happening recently is as Jam is growing, we'll have things like, oh, it's a really big record day in terms of usage. We had all these people creating jams and no one noticed. It's just when we went to go check the dashboards later. And so actually, I think today's going to be really, really smooth because of all these decisions that they've made along the way. So it's really kudos to them.
All right, that's pretty cool. So I think I take from this that you have a good day so far. But can you introduce yourself to the audience in case someone would not know you in a couple sentences?
Definitely. I'm Dani. I'm one of the co-founders of Jam. I started Jam with a former product manager that I worked with at Cloudflare. We wanted to move fast. We wanted to ship in amazing things for our users, and just the back and forth between product managers and engineers to clarify bugs and issues. It was the frustrating, slow communication cycles. It was slowing us down. And when you're in a company, you don't get extra time to fix your bug reporting process. It really takes a separate company to focus on it. And so that became Jam.
That's really cool. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is twofold. First of all, you asked me on Twitter, I think, whether you could come on the podcast. I think it was like that, something like this. And then I also saw that you can talk. And then I also saw that the message was already 4 months ago or 4 months old at that point. Then we tried to schedule an episode. Then I rescheduled, then you rescheduled, then I rescheduled. So I think at this point, your company was at a probably completely different point.
yeah, it's a different company
than it is today. So you're still a relatively small gig by all intents and purposes, but we can definitely talk about also how you reach product market fit and so forth. But I think you also shared a very interesting kind of story around this. And maybe we could talk really quickly about what does the company do? What is the product that you are selling? And to whom are you selling it? How does it feel? Because you have a really cool kind of value proposition.
Yeah, probably when we reached out, we were much earlier. There are now more than 100,000 people using Jam. They've fixed more than 2 million bugs faster using Jam, which is really exciting. So here's what Jam does. If you are a product manager, you've probably had this experience where you see a bug, you take a bunch of screenshots, maybe even screenshot the console, you create the perfect Jira ticket for an engineer, and the engineer opens the ticket, writes, works fine on my end, and then closes the ticket. And that's because there's just not a good way to show what's happening behind the scenes. We're just missing tools. It's all very manual. So the PM spends tons of time trying to communicate to the engineer, and the engineer actually didn't get what they needed. So Jam solves that. It's let me show you for software development. It's an extension you add to your browser. And when you see a bug, you just click on it, and it captures everything the engineer needs to debug what just happened in a link to share. So the last 30 seconds of the screen played back like a video. It captures console logs and network requests and what user ID and browser and device and hardware and all of the session details. And that way an engineer just opens the link and they can just immediately debug.
That's a really cool idea. And I think this is what you would probably also share typically like in a Jira ticket that needs to, like go somewhere and so forth. So that sounds really exciting. So I think the product itself is, I think you made a really good job in kind of explaining this. But what's also more interesting to me is that like, how did the company grow? Because for you, this is also like one of the big challenges. It's not just like having the idea, but it's like, how do you find the first users and how do we think about customer acquisition? And this podcast is a lot about product-led growth. You also were talking about how you are a product-led growth company, but at the same time, you have a very unique approach to marketing, at least in some kind of ways. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about marketing this tool into the markets and why you're betting so much, for instance, on community and so forth?
So what's cool about building a dev tool is that all of your users are builders too. And so we're all trying to figure out together how to build great products, how to do interesting things in the world through software. And what's really cool about building a dev tool is like, yeah, you're building your dev tool over here, but what people are using it to create is amazing. Like we get to talk to our users every day and they're trying to change some corner of the world through software. And Jam is just a tool that helps them do that like a little bit faster, like make it a little bit more streamlined and easier to like go change their corner of the world, whether it's healthcare or finance or education. It's just super amazing. And so we decided early on that we would prioritize just being builders at Jam, building for the builders who use Jam. And that means just sharing, like there are humans behind the company. Part of this is just like natural through user conversations. We just were like, wow, like it's really special to get to share with these like back and forth and like learn lessons from each other. But also part of it is strategic. Like when we think about what do people want in 2024, they don't want boring, anonymous corporate companies. They want to connect with people as people. And we can see it in other examples of companies that we admire. Like early on at Jam, we asked our engineering team, like, hey, do you like Vercel or Netlify more? And this is like, both of them are amazing companies, amazing products. But our engineers were like, oh, I don't really know the difference, but I follow lots of Vercel engineers on Twitter. Now, fast forward a few years, and Vercel has really taken off. There's something about knowing the humans behind the company that creates trust, that like it's just a different type of connection with the company, and it's really inspiring to me as like a consumer, and it's the type of company we want to build. So how do we do that? There are a couple things. The first is we've been doing a lot of events. We want to actually meet our users in person. And so we host a couple of events a month. They're usually demos of some sort, whether it's like technical demos or product demos or AI demos, and just like invite the user base out and like the startup community so we can all like learn from each other. But the second thing that we just started doing is we're always trying to share like from us, like what we're learning building Jam. And we just launched a podcast called Building Jam, where every single week we're discussing what it's actually like in this moment in the company. 4 of us from the team hop on. So it's me, my co-founder, and 2 others. And it changes each week depending on what's the biggest thing happening in the company. And we just discuss our biggest challenges that week. And it's unfiltered. Like we'll just bleep out something if it's really like, okay, we don't want to talk about this feature yet, but it's just a raw conversation. And I'm really excited about it. We just recorded the 2nd episode, but excited to be sharing like, here's what it's actually like behind the scenes here.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit off camera. And I think for also those people who are listening, like if you think about creating a podcast, this is just like a tip that I share with everyone. You need to make sure that whatever you're recording is on a consistency in some kind of way, which means that if you do, and I think you also said something like this, right? So like we're going to commit to this for a couple of months and then we see what's happening at a very specific cadence. So like we're going to have, for instance, 1 episode per week. Whatever your cadence is, I think it's important that you give yourself enough time and also keep this cadence. You may change, with time, the format a little bit in regards to like, we're going to upgrade our microphones. That's a very typical one, or like the lighting is going to get improved. But you should stay on top of mind of people like with whatever cadence you have in your mind. Why is this important? Because this is a very slow burn. And this is a very slow burn for one specific reason. Podcast audiences and some of these channels are really starting to grow because of the word of mouth. Hey, I listened to this particular episode. This was really interesting. Or like, hey, aren't you dealing with a problem like this? It's not about the company per se. It's more like about the piece of content first. And then if you see a second or a third suggestion of something, then you start to like, hey, okay, maybe I'm associating it now with the company. So first it turns from like an interesting piece of content, then it starts to turn into an interesting piece of content from Jam.Dev or whatever, or like from Leia or whatever it is, right? And this takes time. And I think people really have to stop a little bit looking into like content in regards to like, okay, I have this one piece and now I hope that I get 50 engagements from it. Because I also shared this with you. I know for a fact that I have a couple of people who are listening to all 50 episodes that I have so far once they get hooked. Like they go through the entire catalog, like from start to finish. When you are new with the channel, you don't have 50 episodes. And that's fine. But that also kind of skews a little bit your numbers downwards, right? Like it looks like at the start, like, hey, there's not that much happening. So this is why when you're doing it over a longer period of time, you will see also some acceleration in usage, which you then can extrapolate like, okay, so if we would commit to this like for another year or two, how would this look if the growth was linear? And this is with so many PLG initiatives. Instead of like just dumping the majority of your kind of money at the start and then kind of maintain it a little bit, you should have a lower investment, but that you can keep consistently over months and months and months and months and months to see like whether you gain a little bit more traction that you then can extrapolate into something profitable. I don't know whether this makes sense, but like to me, this is also how I approach it with my podcast, my LinkedIn channel, and also Substack. And that seems to work quite well.
I love that. And what you've done is like clearly prove it works. We've done this with a few other things. This is like a system that works well for us, which is we decide on day one for how long we're going to stick to what schedule. And we don't reevaluate until we hit the end of that schedule. So another thing that when we were first trying to figure out like how should we grow the company, we had a hypothesis that a lot of founder-led sales was now happening passively on the internet, where like what used to be like a first call or like an intro would happen now just like passively as someone's like scrolling on LinkedIn or Twitter. And so we're like, that's an interesting hypothesis. How are we going to test it? And we decided we would just start posting online on Twitter and LinkedIn every single business day for 6 months. And we would not evaluate how it's going until that 6-month mark. And it does not come naturally to either my co-founder or me to be online and posting. Like it's very uncomfortable. And actually, I remember the first day of our trial of this, where it was my first time ever posting on LinkedIn. I felt anxiety all over my body. I was just like this. I just felt so cringy. I was like, what's everyone going to think? And every call I had that day, I like shared screen. I was like, I posted this on LinkedIn. Should I delete it? And everyone's like, literally no one cares. Just keep it. And so we just kept doing this every day. And I'm so glad that we had this like 6-month mark, because even I think on month 3, like halfway through, there were no results to share. Like we didn't have this feel of like whether or not it's working. But by the 6-month mark, it was actually really clear that this was one of the core ways we'd be connecting with our existing users and meet new ones.
I think this is a really good point. And let's just dig a little bit more into the details, because I really like how you said like, oh, we're not going to peek at the numbers. First of all, you definitely did peek at the numbers, but you did not make a decision. So that's kind of fine. I know how obsessive things can go. I remember specifically how incredibly hard it was for me to get the first 1,000 kind of followers on LinkedIn or whatever. And now I make this over a weekend that is going well or whatever. But like, I just don't pay that much attention anymore. But like, I really like this, like, so give yourself enough time to kind of evaluate whether there is growth happening and also like at what kind of rate. So interestingly, when you said that you started to kind of post, let's just talk to companies who are trying to evaluate this. And we have a lot of companies in this podcast, from scale-ups to startups and so forth. And they're like, so how do I think about this? Now, if you don't have a content marketer or someone that is really experienced, they might ask themselves, what am I going to post all the time?
Yeah.
About my product?
Yes.
And this addition is actually wrong, right? Like it's not about the product. It's about the problem space of your target group. And then occasionally you can also mention your product, of course, but this is not a sales show first. It's a value show first. So you talk to the people that you want to sell to without talking about your product predominantly, but you talk about the problems that they usually have in order to create trust that, hey, these people actually know what they're talking about. They understand really what I'm doing. It's not about the deceiving behavior. Did you think about this as well in the same time? Like, so like, what do you post about all the time?
Oh my gosh, yeah. What are we going to post every day? The other one that was really frightening to me up front is the first few times you do this, you spend so much time writing because you're not yet in the practice. And so I was like, oh my God, I don't have this time every day. Like, this is crazy. But as we kept doing it, the process became a lot faster. And we found like, I don't know, you just get better at things that you do every day. So those are the two things. I think the way that you said it is spot on. And I don't think I could have crystallized that. Like if I think about, okay, what are we posting? We had this sort of hypothesis of like, we're builders building for builders. Let me just share what it's like building our startup. But actually that is kind of our problem space. Like the nature of being a dev tool is that everyone who is using Jam is doing it to improve their development process so that they can like ship amazing things into the world. And so when we're posting about like what it's like to build our company, that is actually addressing the problem space. And I think you're spot on.
So how do you think about the online events? Because you said, like the offline events, because you also said that you're doing also like in person. And there's two questions that really interest me on this one. So like there as well, like same question. How did you make the decision that, yeah, we should do this? And how did you determine for yourself whether this is worth doing or like keep doing it? Because physical events are a pain in the ass to organize. How do you decide where you start? Is it where you just are, where you live? Or like, how did this come about?
The way we figured out marketing at Jam was we had kind of a very basic R&D framework to follow. So we had a table with 4 columns in it. The first column was like our backlog of ideas, stuff that might be interesting to try. The next column was like stuff that we were trying for the first time. The next column was stuff that we thought was like kind of starting to work and we kind of wanted to give it some more space and time. And the last column is like, this works and it's time to operationalize it. So it's like, maybe it's like column 0 is backlog, column 1 is like experimenting, column 2 is like doing it in a way that doesn't scale, and column 3 is like doing it in a way at scale. So we knew community was really going to be one of the ways that we grow. And the reason why we knew that is because when we talk to product managers about how did you hear about your favorite tools, they always say another product manager told me. So it's got to be something that kind of has that like organic feel. And so we had like lots of community type ideas in the backlog. Should we have a big Discord? Should we have a big Slack? Should we have like, what should we do? And in-person events was one of the ideas. When we did the first one, it felt really special. Part of it was timing. So it was kind of coming out of the pandemic. For many people who joined us that first time, it was their first meetup in years. And it had this like special feel of like we're all getting together. We all have the same challenges at work. Like we're all trying to solve really cool things. Our first in-person event was called Engineering Horror Stories. It was off the record, engineers sharing times that they took down prod. It was like we laughed, we cried, we commiserated. It was super cathartic. And it just had this like specialness of like, we've got to do that again.
So how do you measure in some kind of way? Like this is always the question that I get also like from specifically like the higher level C-levels. How do you measure now the success of this? And can you maybe also give us a little bit of an idea of scale? Like how many offline events did you do? And how do you still kind of, or like how much time do you also invest? And maybe also you personally, I mean, you're a relatively small startup still, but like how much of your energy goes into this?
Yes. So when we were setting up our R&D framework for like, which things would we try? How would we figure out what marketing is at Jam, that like 4-column table? We also needed a way to assess whether ideas should progress from one column to the next. So actually the first step that we did is we added, well, every user who signs up for Jam gets an email from my co-founder saying like, hey, let me know if you need any help getting started. And actually this email is so great. It like sparks all these great discussions. We meet so many of our users through this email. Like people respond and it like kicks off this conversation. And we just added a PS in that email, which was, PS, how did you hear about Jam? And we just started tally marking their responses, like very basic Google Sheet, nothing very fancy. It was all manual. But that tally mark allowed us to A, assess where were people already hearing about Jam, which gave us ideas for what to put in the column 0, like our backlog. But B, as we were trying new things, if we heard about it from users, that it meant it was working. And if we were not hearing about it, then it's probably not working. There's also a gut feel aspect too. At an early stage startup, like you probably don't want to trust the data 100%. You're not in an optimization phase. You probably also don't want to trust your gut 100%. Sometimes there were things that we hadn't yet heard from users like as a reason, but like events took us like a little bit of time to start hearing. But we just had this feeling that it was special based on like the response we got from the event. Like people were like, there was just this feeling like something here is working, even if we don't yet see it in data. Like let's keep waiting. So as new like initiatives progress from like try it and do it in a way that doesn't scale to do it in a way that scales. At first, it was just like we did one event a month and it was like, it was me and I had a freelancer helping. And then once we're like, this is working, we hired our first marketing hire, Ivana. She's amazing. And she runs all these events and we're now able to do 3 or 4 a month. across multiple cities. So at the beginning, it's very do things that don't scale. And now it's like, this works so well, let's go.
That is really cool. And I think, again, so now you changed the cadence, right? Like, and like you said, like you're doing it weekly almost right now?
We're not only just doing 3 or 4 a month. So like, yeah, it's basically almost weekly, but we also, in addition, the events were just so special, like builders getting together, it's still very post-pandemic. Like people are so happy to meet people like them trying to do big things in the world through software that we launched a program called Jam.Pizza, which is Jam will sponsor. If you're getting developers or PMs or builders together, Jam will sponsor. And so every month we get applications from all over the world. The URL is Jam.Pizza, and we're just like Venmoing people for the pizza at their event. So yeah, so about one a week, but also there's like a whole extended network of Jam.Pizza events.
So how did you now move on, like in regards to like the geography of things? Like, so how did you think about like where to do this? Like, I don't know where you're living, but I assume that this is where you probably started. So you did not have to fly across the country. And how did this now develop?
To be honest, this is something we're still figuring out. So I'm based in San Francisco, and we do a lot of events in San Francisco because, well, I'm here.
That makes sense.
But the other thing that we've done is we've just like sorted our like user database by country and then, or like city, and have done events in those cities. So we did an event in London, for example, because we have so many users in London. We have a lot of users around big like European cities. So this summer, we're going to be doing like, there's like 2 weeks where we're going to be doing events in Berlin, London, Paris, like a bunch of those. They're expensive to do, like flying us and swag and organize, like it's a lot of lift. And so definitely something we're still figuring out. And like ideally we would make it really easy for any user who wanted to be hosting events like this wherever they are, wherever builders are. Like there are builders all over the world. It just kind of feels wrong that right now our events are mostly in San Francisco and New York.
It is expensive. I know this because I also started my own event line. Not even close to as frequent as you are. I only had like one now under my belt, and we're going to do it right now quarterly. But like, I'm going to fly in different cities in Europe. So you need to have sponsors unless you want to pay for all this by yourself. But I also do believe in the power of like really meeting people in person, even though, like the scale might be completely different. But I think there is something really going on there, like as you said, like people getting together and then something is happening. Sometimes you also don't know. But I think I wanted to say 2 things to this. The way that you just said this, like, like the founder sending an email and says like, hey, can I help you with anything? And then they actually also start to reach out and also respond. This reminds me a lot on the earlier days of Superhuman. They still do this. They have a very strong hypothesis around their white glove experience, which means that almost every customer has had an actual call with someone from Superhuman, like helping them to actually onboard. And it's not a sales call. This is already after they are like, sign up for the trial and so forth. And this seems to be working extremely well for them. And I think there is just like this kind of, there is a difference between it's in a product-led growth business, whether you focus so much effort on like, how do I get my customers versus how do I keep them? And this is something that people are misunderstanding about product-led growth a lot. Like they think this is a go-to-market motion, but I actually disagree in a lot of aspects. One of the reasons why our products in product-led growth are so easy to use and more pleasant rather than like the dinosaur garbage that is being just like still floating out there somewhere is because we care about retention, because we get it slapped in the face if it's not the case. We have usually subscriptions that are being canceled very fast. We have a community that is very loud. We depend on word of mouth. And this is why these products are also better for retention in the longer term, for sure. This is why I just don't think that PLG is just an acquisition thing. It's actually very much a retention thing.
100%. The meeting your users is, well, for us, it's been night and day. So when you're a PLG company, the thing that's existential is, are you giving value to your users? Which is great. The thing that I love about PLG is you are perfectly aligned with your users. Like your incentive is to serve them. And if you give them value, then you grow and they retain. And if you don't, like it's so fair. I love that in a PLG startup. And so the key to doing that is making sure you're really close to your users, because the worst case would be you're working really hard over here and you started to ignore, and then like, you're not delivering that. Like that would be terrible. And so we make a huge effort to talk to users. It's not quite superhuman. Like we don't try to hop on a call with every single one, But like if anyone's traveling, we're always reaching out, trying to meet users there in person. Like, for example, last week our team got together in Bogota, Colombia for like a teamwork offsite. And we were just like there for a week, all working in person. And we also reached out to our top Bogota-based users to see if they were down to meet. And so we scheduled like a handful of coffee chats, like bringing in the team. We got to meet them in person. It was super special. But the things that you learn sitting in person with someone are so awesome, and like you learn so much more than on a Zoom. Because in a Zoom, oftentimes like the purpose of the Zoom is to deliver the information and get off the Zoom. But when you're in person, it just like the real stuff comes out, which is like, this is my first product management job and I'm using these tools because I want to make sure I do a good job and I don't have any training. Like I'm nervous and that's what this replaces for me. It's like for us to know that, it like we have this different empathy with the user and we can write better tutorials, better onboarding copy. Like we can just serve them better. So anyway, yes, meeting users 100%.
This is a really good point because I think there's ironically one kind of problem that we have in PLG businesses versus sales-led businesses. And this is always like this discussion about ICPs, like who is your ideal customer profile? Who is your actual customer? And there is this weird kind of product-led growth group of companies who really struggle with understanding their ICPs and who they are. And I think it's also because they think that, oh, in PLG, I don't really have to talk to my users, right? Like it's kind of like the introvert's dream. Like I have something that can be self-served. I do not need sales and so forth. Because if sales does one thing really good, aside from costing a lot of money, they talk to people. They know the valuable accounts, right? Like they're really, really good in identifying ICPs and so forth because this is their livelihood, right? Like this is their business to know, to understand firmographics. It's just like you said, there is an incentive for them to know the customers because if you know your customers, you can close them better, you get more bonus and so forth and so forth. And I feel like we have sometimes this really weird thing with PLG companies that we just do not know who we're talking to because we do not foster this kind of real life connection. So sometimes you have PLG companies that are sitting too much on quantitative data and they do not really understand the qualitative side of it. I'm not just talking about user interviews. I'm really talking about going out and understanding prospective buyers and so forth. Whereas on sales-led, we have the exact inverse, where they're just like sitting on qualitative learnings all day, and this is how they form the backlog, but they have absolutely they have zilch idea on like what people are doing in their product. And this is why I'm such a big fan of like this combination, like of product-led sales, like where you try really in some kind of way try to understand both because it's, whatever you do. And I think this is why this is so great to also hear that you're trying to do this in this kind of physical medium, because even if we do not generate leads and money from the actual events, you kind of still do because you get information who it is that is buying your stuff, what is creating all the emotions, and what is monetizable about your product in the end. And yeah, a lot of good ideas have actually been sparked on events like these, like on a conversation and so forth. So you never know where inspiration is coming from.
One of the things like that we've agree with everything you've just said, and we have a tactic internally that we use where in product-led growth, the product has to do the selling and it has to do the onboarding. It has to do all the things that a human like in a sales position would do. And that's really hard to design for. And so what we do is whenever we're launching something that's net new, or like when we first were launching the product, we first do handheld, like on a call, like salesperson, really just founder. It's my co-founder. He does an amazing job, like onboarding and selling. And then we fine tune those conversations. Like, how do we get someone to be empowered with like the new superpower of whatever the functionality is in as like little time as possible. And once we like just get those calls really tight, like we know how to help someone get really like productive with this product quickly. We take the words that he uses on the call and they become our product copy because the product has to talk to the user in lieu of a person. So for example, when we were first like opening up our product, before making it self-serve, we did a bunch of onboarding calls. And Urtifa, my co-founder, got really good at like, here's how to get the onboarding call down to like a few minutes and the person is good to go. Like he would first make the promise to them. He'd say, hey, in the next few minutes, I'm going to help you help the engineers at your companies fix bugs faster, right? And now when you onboard our product, exactly what he would say is now the copy you see on the screen. So we like definitely take that, exactly what you said, like the product has to talk to your users and we make it like super concrete.
You can do a really cool hack on this one. And I think I also talked about this with Anthony Pieri on this. Like, he's really good. He's also very prominent on LinkedIn about, like how you create good messaging on the homepage and so forth, because this also goes a little bit into this reaction. It's like, what is your copy? Like, how do you talk to the user? Whether that's through the navigation, through an in-feature thing, or like through your website that is on the top of it. And I think it's really good if you have someone on that you feel like, hey, this is an ideal customer that I'm really interested in. You just ask them, hey, can you explain to me like what we do? Just like what, like how, in your own words, like what is this, right? So like whether it's your company, your brand, your feature, or whatever it is. And this really sparks some good ideas on like, first of all, you see like what is actually arriving and what actually sticks with the users, which is usually less than you think it is. But it also tells you like the wording that they are using for stuff, because they're not using your wording and the things that we did the keyword research on and so forth. So this is an interesting one as well. And I think just of kind of putting this together, because you also mentioned a second kind of topic that we were talking about this. So we know how we should run product-led growth. And it's not just about acquisition. Some of it is also about like late-stage onboarding and retention and so forth. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some kind of product-led sales. I know you're not there at this point, but like I mentioned in the intro that you have some bigger clients like Unilever, Staples, T-Mobile, and Dell, and so forth. And I find this quite interesting. So just for context, this does not mean that the entire company is using your tool, but you have individual teams that are using it, right? Is that a correct kind of framing of how it is right now?
Yeah, it's been very, very interesting and very cool. What you said about like having a really hard time to figure out exactly who your ICP is, we definitely struggled with that at first because we were building a very horizontal tool that lots of different teams and team sizes should be able to use. But we also knew the standard startup advice was like figure out exactly who is your ICP and cater to them. And so we kind of did at first. Like when we first were like launching our product, it was very, very early. We had a bunch of pilots set up and they were with a very sort of like narrow ICP. Like we had like company size and like we were working with like mostly startups. We just had this like idea of who these companies would be that would be early adopters of our product. But there was actually a way to sign up for our product. You had to sort of hunt around on our landing page, but there was a way to sign up self-serve, even like bypass the waitlist. And some teams at bigger companies just started using the product. And so we're like, okay, so it turns out our ICP is wrong. Like actually within even larger companies, there are smaller teams, and small teams across companies kind of have very similar issues. They're all trying to move faster. They're all trying to save communication cycles. They've all just gone remote in this moment and are trying to figure out async communication. And so it's very, very horizontal. And so one of the really cool things that we've seen happen is that this PLG motion has helped us grow to some of our like favorite, Fortune 100s, like teams within Disney and Salesforce and Nike are using Jam. And it wasn't that we did any top-down like sales motion, but rather that, PMs are well networked. They're talking to each other about what tools to use. And then within a company, if you have like a couple of viral loops, that the tool spreads.
So here's how you win the overall account. So let me show you. Here's how you win the entire account. So what you did so far, which happened organically, is you onboarded parts of a team of a really big organization. And let's just talk about how this feels from the inside of that organization and what happened. And let's also maybe understand, like, why did this happen? Like, why is this even possible to happen? Why is happening what you just described, right? So the first one is we need to kind of put this a little bit into perspective for the people who do not know your product. The pricing that you have is roughly $10 per user, or like if you're a business user, then you pay like $50 per user, whatever. Like this is not enterprise kind of software where you just have to pay like 50,000 just to get started and so forth. Now, why does that matter? That matters because let's say you have a PM with, I don't know, 5 people that are using this, or like, like maybe a group of PMs that are this, and like, hey, it's cool. Like, let's do this at Dell, at Unilever, and so forth. And they say, this is interesting. What's happening is that people like me, the CPO or the group lead or the director, is getting a budget request. Maybe at Dell, it's not the CPO, of course. It's more like the group PM or like the director. They get a budget request. And that budget request says, hey, I want to use this particular tool. It's Dev Jam, whatever. Then they have to approve it. Now, that person who is approving this budget has never heard of this company. They probably also do not care that much, but they just, like they approve it. So what happened just now? Probably depending on like how big the company is, they still had to kind of provide some information about the company tool that they want to use, what it is, Does it fulfill some kind of compliance? The cheaper the tool is, the less compliance it actually has to fulfill, which is quite funny to me. Like data protection and so forth, some things, whatever. So this is how you get in. And now what happened is that you exist in that particular system as a vendor in some kind of way in team number 1. Let's say with time, and this will also happen to you, team number 2, team number 3, and team number 4 are starting to onboard. And they might not even hear from each other at all. They have nothing to do with each other. So the same thing is happening to their group lead. Another budget request goes in, and another budget request goes in, and so forth. So now you are in a position to know that you have 3 independent teams from the same company starting to work with your tool on this entire thing. So if you think about now this company as a market, what you should do is you should try to find out who is the boss of that person who signed off on the budget. Maybe we can reach out to them proactively and say, hey, 3 teams in your company are already, or like in your division or whatever it is, already using this. Would you be open to talk about this? And then it's very easy for them to check, like, oh yeah, they're in our system. Yeah, like there's a lot of people that are using it. Wouldn't it be better if like everybody would use it, right? So like we can also make a good offering and so forth. It's the same thing as if you just like start to climb up the ladder, like in a market, you just went in from the bottom and you started to grab value before it became an actual enterprise problem. And that is why a lot of PLG companies like yours get the value before the huge horizontal solution, that costs just so much more money, even has a chance of grabbing the money from that particular use case. I hope that makes sense. But there's a lot of companies who are doing this, right? So like they start to gather the data and then they just go like, so who's the responsible one for this? Let's make him an offer. And it's interesting sometimes for these people because they do not even know that, oh, okay, 3 of my teams are using this. That's interesting. Yeah, let's consolidate.
One tactic here, if people are sort of starting out on this journey, one investment we made early on that helped us was going through the SOC 2 Type 2 compliance process, where before we went through that process, a lot of sort of larger companies wanted like a team to just start using it, but they couldn't because that's just on their checklist. And as soon as we went through that process, we sort of stopped hearing those questions. It took a Herculean amount of work by my co-founder and our head of engineering, but like totally paid off and really happy we did it. So if anyone's building a PLG company from scratch, highly recommend.
This is a great point because you would think that, oh, okay, so we're doing the compliance process only to sell to Dell as a whole. No, you're absolutely not. You're allowing actually the smaller teams to get in, even though the overall thing was a more expensive process. It's the same like when you're dealing with like medtech stuff, like HIPAA and so forth. You need to check specific boxes in these companies, even though you're not selling to the huge, like overall account. But if you think about it on a longer term, I would be very interested to see like how these accounts are developing over 2 or 3 years. Because, like also like if they are internally sharing best practices or whatever, and it really works, you have a chance of like also of grabbing more and more and more. So I think this is super exciting, right? Like for me, this is product-led sales to me, right? Like we're spreading it at the bottom and kind of like, it goes up when you have a lot of expansion revenue. Yeah.
I mean, we're pretty excited when we think about sort of this moment at Jam. Well, we think about like there's sort of a journey that PLG companies take, and you sort of have to do the journey in order. Like it doesn't really make sense to skip a step. Like first you have to figure out product market fit. And then once you figure out product market fit, you have to make it production grade and stable and resilient and all the things. And it doesn't make sense to do that until you have product market fit. And then you have to figure out how to grow it. And then once you figure out how to grow it, you figure out the sales side of things. And that's sort of where we're at now. And it doesn't make sense to figure out the sales side of things unless you know that it will grow very like with good virality, because that's the fuel that gets funneled into the sales process. And so that's sort of this moment at Jam is just figuring out everything that you've just said.
And it's interesting, right? Like, so your company, I think, is 2 years old, right?
The product is 2 years old. The company is 4. It took us 18 months to figure out the version of the product that had PMF that would work.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? Because it anyways takes almost always about 2 years to kind of figure out product market fit. And I find this funny because it doesn't matter how cool your idea is. It just takes 2 years.
It's so funny. Everyone told us, yeah.
You have to let go of it too, right? Like your initial idea was a different one. So like, I don't know, it's just like, yeah, this is going to work 100%, Dani. Like this version is going to work. No, it's probably a different one.
I remember when we raised an early like VC round, and one of the VCs we talked to told us, yeah, you're 24 months away from getting to product market fit. And I just thought, like, how does he know? Like, what if we hit it tomorrow? Like, and I just had this, like, I kind of wrote it off. And that is just how long it takes. And there's a really great chart from Lenny's newsletter where he asked around like founders of a lot of like, the PLG SaaS companies that we all look up to, how long did it take? And it's like between 1.5 to 4 years. Like that's just the time it takes, it's a humbling chart. And also like, just like a law of startups or something.
Yeah. It's sometimes a little bit like when you're at the start of these 2 years, it feels very daunting and long. So you better not believe it. Just like lie to yourself so you get through the 2 years. It's kind of fine too. But at the end of the 2 years, you're like, hey, where did the time go? Because we're already 2 years in. Time is a very relative kind of term in startups, I feel like, because you're so busy. Everything is changing all the time. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. So I talked to Eric Alabast yesterday, who's the CEO of chess.com, which is a completely different scale, right? Like 150 million in ARR. And you're just running from zero revenue. And then suddenly you're over there, wherever you are. And it feels like, where did the time go? Everything has changed. Everything has gone crazy. And these are like sometimes these PLG success stories that you have. But yeah, there's just never room to breathe. So I hope that you have enough room to breathe for yourself as well as you go now into the next phase. So like, what is the next milestone for Jam.Dev?
Well, I just want to speak to one thing that I wish I knew when we first started, which is now it feels like the years are short. Like I was just talking to an engineer on our team this morning who is hitting his 1 year like anniversary at Jam, his Jam anniversary. And we're like, where did that year go? That just flew by. I can't believe you joined this time last year. But the first 2 years of the company were slow and painful because oftentimes, like, even if you know it takes a long time to get to product market fit, going through it yourself has a ton of uncertainty. Like, what if we never get there? And the cost of not getting there is really high because you've made a lot of promises to people that you'll try your best, and you've taken on a lot of people's time and trust and money. Like when you hire a team, you're like, hey, let's go on this journey and I think we can get there. And you've made a promise that you'll try your best. And if you don't get there, like you've sort of let that down. And so that's a lot of pressure. And same when you take VC investment. Like, of course, VCs know that most of their investments will not succeed. And then like one out of however many will. But it's real money. It's from like a real pension. It's real people's money. And so those years of uncertainty of will this work for me felt very long. It was the most amount of responsibility I had ever taken on as a 26-year-old. And so yeah, I think those were hard. Now the years fly by. So just wanted to speak to that. What the next moment is like at Jam is really exciting. It's the first year of the Jam product was about figuring out product market fit and making it scalable, production grade, resilient. Last year was all about how do we grow this thing? And then we just hit 100,000 users and 2 million bugs like fixed faster. And this year is all about commercialization, the product-led sales motion. We're growing the team a little bit. And so it's sort of new challenges, new processes. It's a new moment for the startup. It feels like a different startup than it was this time last year.
Yeah. And I hope you treasure the moment because I think you're on the most difficult journey. I think you've taken a lot of the most difficult steps already. Like getting to the users is already very, 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 very hard. You already have some traction. And so things are working, right? So like, this is good. So you can be hopeful, but you cannot sleep, unfortunately. So unfortunately, it's not going to happen. So I do I always ask the founders that I advise, like, so what does the number have to say so you can sleep quiet? And then when we reach this number, eventually I ask them, so like, do you sleep quiet now? And they're like, nah, the number has just gotten bigger a little bit. And I think it's sometimes very important to also like give yourself a break and just be like, okay, you know what? We don't always have to put on the foot does not need to be on the accelerator pedal all the time. And just don't forget yourself in that kind of journey.
One of the mind shifts that's really helped me is there will always be a bigger company to aspire to be, right? Like now we aspire to startups ahead of us. One day we're going to be aspiring, hopefully, to like the FANG companies, right? Like always there will be more to be done. And that's the joy of building a company. And so if you just put your happiness on the goal and like you don't rest, like you won't love the journey and then you'll burn out and that's the biggest risk, right? But one of the really helpful mind shifts for me was to make it about something else as well. And one of the things that's for me most rewarding is when I see my teammates grow in some way and improve and level up. And when I see them aim up and achieve, it just like that makes me so happy. And so the day-to-day moments as we're striving towards our next goal and our next goal for me are like dotted with all these moments where I see an engineer on the team like shipped something, users love it, and there was no issues. And like they worked really hard on it and they did it. Or when our PM on the team right now, she's a first-time PM. And so every week I'm seeing her get better and better and better. She's amazing already. But like when I see her do things that I hadn't seen her do before, and like when I see the team's trust building around her, I just feel like these are the moments of the startup. And so that's been really like lovely and helpful as a mind shift.
I remember when I was at Turing Fest about 1 or 2 years ago with John Cutler. And John is a good friend, and he had a presentation where he talked about, I think in bigger companies, we sometimes forget to celebrate what we've been doing. Like we never really stopped to see like what we were doing. And I think it's much, much easier also in a smaller startup, like because you're also very connected to people and so forth. But as we scale and we become bigger, we sometimes really forget to celebrate, and also to be proud of what we're doing, because it's very, very easy to just kind of get buried in like this busyness and so forth. So the only advice that I have to you is like preserve that spirit as long as you can. And yeah, once you're hitting the first 100 employees, we're gonna record another episode. So let's see whether you could have kept that spirit, but that's really good. So Dani, this was an amazing hour spent with me, and I'm very grateful for this. And I hope that you also got something out of it. And my last question to you is like, do you want people to get in contact with you? If so, where should they do it? And where can they tell you about bugs that are in your product?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. This was such a delight. I love what you're doing, and like builders sharing with builders. I love what you're doing. This was
Thank you.
Awesome to be here. Thank you. Yes, please reach out. I'm Dani at Jam.Dev. And especially if you're using Jam and you've got ideas, suggestions, feature requests, probably I've already reached out to you. I reach out to the top 100 users from the week prior every week. But if not, just reach out to me and I'd love to hear how it's going. Oh, and listen to the Building Jam podcast. We release new episodes every Friday, and it's like real conversations between co-founders and teammates about what's actually happening inside the company, our biggest challenges that week, how we're building Jam.
That sounds cool. We will put it in the show notes. And that's it from the Product Tea today. Thank you so much. Baboom. Thank you so much for listening to the Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.